Good morning, everybody. We'll just wait till everybody is in place. All right, so while everybody's still getting loaded in, I'll just make the introductions. Good morning, my name is Brendan Garrity. I'm the Chief Exec of the UKAA. We represent the build-to-rent industry here in the UK. And of course, we are very, very concerned to provide useful and practical information and strategies for our membership and indeed the industry more broadly. And in many ways, nothing can be more pressing at the moment than the Building Safety Act and its implications on our industry, which are profound. This is part two of a three-part series. The first one was held a week or two ago on preparing for the Building Safety Act. That'll be available on our website as part of the best practice guide. And today we are looking at resident engagement and the how-to and the implications of that. And of course, we'll be finishing this three-part series at our conference on the 2nd of November. Tickets are available now, where we will have the regulator speaking at conference on the Building Safety Act. So a really kind of amazingly valuable series. And of course, I'm joined on the series, as always, by ARC, David Hills, who you'll know from the previous presentation, and this morning, Jody Wilson. And without any further ado, I will hand over. We'll have a Q&A session towards the end. We think about 10 or 15 minutes towards the end. Please put your questions in the chat, and I will adjudicate that towards the end of the session. So thank you very much from me, and over to you, David and Jody.
Hi there. Just going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Yes. Right. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much, Brendan. It's great to be working with the UKAA again. Most of you know me, so my name is David Hills. I am Senior Director here at ARC. And joining me this time, so you won't be listening to my dulcet tones for too much, will be Jody Wilson. She's Principal Consultant at ARC. And Jody spent over 20 years in the industry of working with engagement, starting off in the NHS and then moving on to roles overseeing resident engagement and tenant engagement. Most recently, Jody's been working with the regulator, trying to help them and determine what best practice looks like and what a good resident engagement strategy would also look like and contain. And whilst Jody would not say too much about this, Jody was recently nominated for the Women in Social Housing Professional of the Year Award due to her work in improving engagement. So what are we going to be covering today? First things first, I'm going to do a quick introduction to the Act and where residents' voice actually fits into that. Jody's then going to take you through what resident engagement looks like and what specifically successful resident engagement looks like. It's then all about looking at some of the pitfalls. So how did we stop falling into the resident engagement entropy trap, and look at 5 dysfunctions of resident engagement practice. We're then going to look at a position of how we can make resident engagement easy, or at least easier. Jody's then going to take you through a case study. And at the end, once we've gone through the final part, we're very happy to obviously take questions from you. So one of the most important things that we need to understand is that the Act is in place. So is the secondary legislation. So we are not, and we are no longer dealing with theory. This is real. We are now in a position where we now need to start thinking about and at least having our resident engagement strategies developed. Now, the fire at Grenfell Tower shattered the lives of countless people in a place which they should at least feel safe, i.e. their home. And despite years of decline in the numbers of incidents and fires in residential blocks, that tragedy crushed flat and apartment occupiers' confidence in the UK's building safety system. So today we're going to focus on one of the more important and in fact one of the next elements of the building safety regime, i.e. giving residents a stronger voice in the system. And so what you're going to hear is all about the fact that resident engagement is not just about communication. I think the clue is in the title. It's about engaging with residents. So our aim today then is to deliver and show you what success would look like regarding engagement, but also bring some awareness on how it can fail. How all too often resident engagement is seen as just putting together some sort of generic statement of intent without really fully understanding the implications and really determining the goals. Therefore, we're looking to try and demystify this resident engagement process, look at how it works in practice, and share some valuable insights and take you through a real life case study. So what sits behind the reason why we've got this within the law? Well, we all know that the Hackett report provided a pretty damning view of the building construction and the ongoing property management industry, finding that as an industry, we are considered to be ignorant, suggesting that regulations and guidance were not always read by those who needed to read them. And often those regulations and guidance was either misunderstood or misinterpreted. And Dame Judith also suggested, and this is the worrying element, and not nice to hear, let's be honest, that actually she felt that we were indifferent. It seems that the primary motivation at that time was to do things quickly, to do things cheaply. When concerns were raised, that actually, do you know what? They were most often ignored. I think also we've not prioritized safety. At least that's what she felt. We had not prioritized safety, and we were using the ambiguity of regulations and guidance to, as she called it, game the system. She also suggested that as a sector, we thrived on a lack of clarity of roles and responsibilities, suggesting actually there was ambiguity over where responsibility actually lied, which was exacerbated by the level of fragmentation within the industry. In fact, she found that when concerns were raised by residents, that they were often ignored, as I said, and that the voices of residents went unheard, even when safety issues were identified. So in developing her recommendations, which have now found their way completely into the Building Safety Act, she found that residents had reported to her that they were extremely frustrated by what they called intermittent or partial information on safety matters. And in addition to that, residents felt that they were inadequately consulted on changes to the building or on safety matters. And she concluded that there was a need across the whole industry to, be it construction, be it management, for greater transparency of information on building safety and consultation and involvement in the decision-making process. So her specific recommendation to government made it very clear that there should be a statutory requirement for the duty holder, i.e. the accountable or principal accountable persons, to have an engagement strategy and to have that in place to support the principles of transparency and sharing of information with residents, and that strategy should have a statutory requirement to outline how the duty holder, the AP and the PAP, for example, will share that information with residents, how they will inform those residents of their rights and responsibilities, and how they can involve residents in the decision-making process. So, what did we actually get? So under Regulation 91 of the Act, what we effectively got was the need for a principal accountable person to, as soon as reasonably practicable, after the relevant time, and the relevant time is once the building is occupied, or if a new PAP comes into play, prepare a strategy called a residents engagement strategy for promoting the participation of the relevant persons being residents who are over the age of 16 or owners of the individual apartments, in the making of building safety decisions. And they've defined building the safety decisions as relating to fire and structure. That in addition to that, that perhaps have to review that strategy at prescribed times. And this last month, we had new legislation that came out which prescribed that minimum period, which is now every 2 years, and then revise it if they consider it necessary or appropriate to do so. So, for example, after a mandatory occurrence or after a change in the building, then again, that is a need or at least a flag to actually review your strategy. Excuse me. And then in prescribed circumstances, which they've again provided some background on, that you must consult with those relevant persons and other prescribed persons, such as the regulator and other enforcing agencies, on the strategy, and take their representations into account when you are next reviewing the strategy. But really, really important is the final element of that particular section, which basically says that you have got to act in accordance with your strategy. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Jodie Wilson, who, as I said, is a leading expert on resident engagement and heads up one of our building safety teams. And she's going to take you through resident engagement and how we can overcome the pitfalls and how you can make, hopefully, engagement easy. Jodie.
Hi, thank you, David. Hi, and thank you everyone for attending. So as David mentioned briefly earlier, engagement and communication are two different concepts. So for communication refers to the act of sharing information, and engagement is about building relationships and fostering active participation. Communication is necessary for engagement to occur, but it's not sufficient on its own. Ongoing dialogue and feedback exchange should always be highly encouraged. You must develop a two-way relationship with your tenants in order for engagement to be effective and successful. Knowing who lives in your blocks is essential to a secure, effective engagement. The regulator does understand that this may not always be easy, especially in blocks with short-term lets, but they do expect you to ensure that the owner of those properties is equipped with information to pass on to their tenants. And so understanding your resident demographics will help you create bespoke strategies suitable to their wants and needs. And to understand the demographics, you're going to have to ask yourself questions such as, how old are your residents? What is the household composition? Is it a family unit? Is it young professionals? Is it retired individuals? Are the residents there? Do they have any additional accessibility needs? And do you need to use different languages? Now, this isn't only in the written expression, but can also cover developmental needs or cultural needs. And in the build to rent world, these demographics are likely to change more frequently than others, and your strategies may need to be reviewed on a more regular basis to accommodate these changes. So successful engagement must be bespoke to the people that live in your building, the building itself, and the wider community. And by wider community, we mean visitors, staff, and contractors. The strategy must be built upon the needs and requirements of the residents. And the only way you can do this is by ensuring that they have active involvement and input in developing the strategy. You need to understand what it is your residents want to be engaged about. Whilst under the new regulations, you are required to provide certain information to all residents, there are some building safety matters that will not be as important to your residents, and this will vary block by block. So if you ask your residents how they wish to be engaged with, by asking them, you're ensuring that the relationship starts off on the right foot. Ensure your engagement is as accessible as reasonably practicable. And it's also important to ask your residents what doesn't work and make sure that you take this into consideration as well. Effective engagement happens at different levels for different people, and it will be dependent on the level of engagement that they feel comfortable committing to. So a common question that I get asked is, how can I demonstrate that we're engaging with residents when the majority of them just don't seem to want to be involved? And Engagement is about identifying and providing opportunities for tenants to get involved at a level and a stage that they're comfortable with. And this will differ greatly household to household. We need to accept that not all residents want to actively participate, but we must be able to demonstrate that we have given them every opportunity to take part. And engagement isn't just about tenant focus groups or scrutiny panels or in-person consultations, but we need to be more expansive in our conception of resident engagement. So this leads us on to the 5 levels of engagement. So level number 1, being made aware. All of your tenants should be aware of you and be aware of the opportunities to communicate and engage with you. They might not want to get involved, but there are opportunities for them to get involved and they're available to them at all times. Level 2, we call opting in. And this is where you'll see residents responding to surveys and participating in some form of contact. The information gathered at this stage can be used to demonstrate to the regulator that you are actively seeking resident views and giving them an opportunity to shape services. And at level 3, we look at participating. And at this level, residents are actively participating in online meetings, consultations, or block walkarounds. And they're giving opinions and lived experiences. And again, this should be taken into consideration when making decisions. Level 4 is co-create, and residents will help create process or policies that directly affect them. New services or transformed services and ways of working can take shape with the opinions and insight of your residents. And finally, level 5, leading the way. This level of engagement is for your actively engaged residents that sit on scrutiny panels, sit on boards or improvement groups. Now, only a handful of your residents will reach this level of engagement across your stock. The regulator will want to see how you are working with residents on the things that matter most to them and at a level of engagement that makes each tenant comfortable and happy. So ask yourself, do you provide opportunities at each of the 5 stages I've just mentioned? It will be important to demonstrate that a resident can engage with you in a way that they want to and at a level they feel comfortable with. So the link between engagement and satisfaction is quite clear. Engaged tenants care more about where they live and they are happier and they're more satisfied with the service that they receive. And therefore, it's beneficial for organisations to look at what it is that strengthens engagement and also what it is that diminishes it. So the 5 dysfunctions of resident engagement. Trust is their trust. Trust is processed subconsciously within the part of the brain that has no capacity for language. So that's why you can't just tell people to trust you. You have to prove it with your actions and by doing what you say you're going to do. Engagement and trust go hand in hand, and one cannot exist without the other. There are several reasons why trust could have been lost. Residents may believe their concerns have been ignored, or they could believe that there's no desire to improve services or performance. Repairs and maintenance may previously have not been carried out effectively, and this can all lead to a breakdown in trust. So how do we go about rebuilding trust? We should show that you value the input of your residents and promote open engagement and communication, acknowledge queries, concerns, and even complaints, and do so in a timely fashion. We often advise people that an acknowledgement should be almost instant and definitely within 24 hours. And provide a commentary on what you're being told and what you're planning to do and by when. This will build confidence in the conversations that you're having with your residents by presenting the information gathered and, more importantly, the changes made because of it. You encourage greater engagement from your residents. So the second level is constructive feedback. Do we accept constructive feedback? Accepting feedback, navigating conflict and having difficult conversations and acting upon them shows your commitment to using resident engagement to improve your services by placing the resident's voice at the heart of what you do. So ensure residents have easy access to provide feedback at any time by various means. Acknowledge and respond to all feedback received. And provide clear, detailed summarisations to your residents, for example, on a quarterly basis, on the feedback received and how you've acted upon this. The "you said we did" ethos is used by a large number of organisations to do this. If you want to demonstrate a highly engaged environment, allowing the exchange of regular feedback is paramount. Doing so provides recognition opportunities, shows commitment to service growth, and fosters an authentic community environment, and it boosts resident engagement. Can we demonstrate commitment? When you are responsible for people's safety, a lack of perceived commitment can breed a culture of failure and a lack of confidence. It could also mean that the service you're providing comes to a standstill instead of evolving and progressing, which in turn lowers enthusiasm and morale for both tenants and staff. If residents are revisiting the same discussions, raising the same concerns, and requesting the same changes, and seeing a lack of results, they will become increasingly disengaged. So to demonstrate commitment, you must maintain the required safety standards in your block, involve your residents in decision-making when it comes to matters relating to building safety, aligning around common objectives, and prioritise clarity. Explain priorities, expectations, and goals. Clearly emphasise on the why, and provide defined expectations and deadlines. Where deadlines are missed, communicate clearly and show an openness to learn from these mistakes. And strive for continuous improvement by regularly evaluating and improving safety and performance. And also, quite key is finding the silent audience. Now, problems, concerns, and complaints cannot be addressed if they are not reported. Many residents may find themselves in the silent category for a number of reasons. They might not feel confident to engage. They might not feel they're being reached out to, or they might not have the tools to reach out. By providing avenues to overcome these barriers, you are demonstrating confidence in your commitment and your accountability. And that leads us on to, do we show that we are accountable? Similarly to demonstrating commitment, you must also demonstrate accountability. Can you clearly evidence how you are ensuring your residents' safety, that you are complying with your statutory duties and responsibilities as the principal accountable person or the accountable person? And is this information easily accessible to your residents? Some ways to show accountability to your residents would be by providing regular, accessible updates regarding building safety, the actions you have taken and are planning to take. This could be by providing resident-friendly fire risk assessments or the results of communal door inspections or surveys. And where applicable, consult and involve residents in changes and work to be undertaken. Ensure residents know how to raise a query, report a concern, or raise a complaint, and have a system in place to deal with these accordingly. And this process must be widely promoted. And where residents do raise concerns, identify risks, or submit a complaint, have a clear process in place that allows you to acknowledge this, investigate, and respond. And where necessary, rectify issues, providing regular and open communication. Then we bring it up to results. So without results, there is no way to measure success, identify strengths, and also highlight problem areas and hidden truths. Measuring results will help you review your engagement strategy and determine what is important to your residents moving forwards. And as you'll be using different methods of engagement, you should also use various methods of measurement. Having a baseline will help you measure the impact, improvement, and areas for improvement within your engagement strategy. Don't just rely on surveys as a measurement tool. There are various ways to measure engagement. You could look at the responses to some communication that you've sent out, the number of attendees at consultations, the level of involvement in decision making, suggestions made, and input received. Any feedback received is a method of measuring engagement. You could see improvement in resident housekeeping and safety awareness, and you can demonstrate that this is your residents being actively engaged and taking on board the discussions that you're having with them. Responses to access requests for inspections and surveys, residents requesting building safety information, and the number of safety inquiries received, and also the number of complaints received. Embrace the good and the bad. Embrace all engagement. Don't shy away from queries, concerns, and complaints. There are positive aspects to these that will enable you to build an engaged relationship with your tenants. So how can we make resident engagement easy? There are some certain quick wins that we can use. Digital platforms. By using digital platforms, this provides great opportunities for residents to freely engage at will, in their own time and at their own pace. It can allow the residents the opportunity to provide feedback, raise queries or concerns, all of which can be logged and evidenced to the regulator as active engagement. Increased footfall and clicks on the app is another demonstrable method to show the regulator that engagement has increased. Regularly communicate updates. By keeping residents regularly updated, you are promoting and enhancing your relationship, which in turn will promote and enhance engagement. There is nothing worse than being told last minute that something is going to happen, and that could potentially have a disruptive effect on the residents, alarm testing or front door inspections. Regular updates will help maintain that sense of being informed and being involved. And your regular updates don't necessarily have to contain a great deal of information. If you find you don't have anything specific to update on, you could remind residents of the block do's and don'ts, or any planned inspections or maintenance work for the following month. Educational pieces also make great updates. Always ensure your updates are communicated in the determined methods and are as accessible as practically possible. Encourage feedback and suggestions, and make it comfortable for residents to provide feedback and suggestions. Make it comfortable for them to raise queries and concerns, or even raise complaints. This is still engagement, and it can still be turned into a positive opportunity. Again, that's demonstrable to the regulator. Community events. If you have the ability and the opportunity, community events are a great way to get residents together. And it's an opportunity to have a number of residents together, actively listening and engaging, and can't be overlooked. And finally, make sure you, your staff, and your contractors have the resources, the capabilities, and the confidence to engage. So this brings me on to the case study. So the case study is about an in-scope block with predominantly leaseholders and some shared owners. There was absolutely no trust due to historic poor repairs, terrible maintenance service, increased service charges, along with an inability to staircase or sell their properties due to fire safety defects. Various concerns were being raised by tenants and had been ignored. There had been no engagement, just snippets of inconsistent and inaccurate information. All of this had led to a block satisfaction score of 2 out of 10 for trust, engagement, and communication. And there had also been issues with property access for safety critical inspections. When we were appointed, we commenced with engaging with residents immediately with a series of in-person and online sessions held at flexible times. And after every meeting, minutes and actions were submitted to every resident within 24 hours, ensuring the residents began to feel heard. An action plan was created for all the non-building safety related issues, and individual contact details within responsible departments were given out. This ensured accountability and demonstrated to the residents that we were not trying to avoid them. And it was also identified during this time that staff training was required to provide staff and contractors with engagement development training. We created a series of bespoke packages to ensure staff had the resources and the confidence to engage with residents, addressing sometimes quite difficult and fraught conversations. The block needed intrusive remedial works to be undertaken by the main developer, and tenants were asked to join the project team and were invited to attend meetings. Although the balconies were not demised to the tenants, they were fully involved in decision making, having input in concept design, the materials used, the programme of works, and the levels of project communication and methods used. And what became quite evident was that residents in the block didn't much care for the fancy newsletters or the Tea on Tuesday events that the developer was suggesting, but instead asked for simple, consistent, and clear updates. Once works commenced, we held weekly evening meetings with the tenants online, and any actions that were raised would be addressed and closed out in a timely manner. And when they weren't, a full explanation and update was given in an open forum. Engagement and communication became natural, productive, and importantly, enjoyable for both tenants and staff. Residents reaching out with inquiries or concerns were no longer ignored or avoided, and staff knew that they had the relationship and resources to resolve almost all of the issues. This development not only benefited the residents, but actually also saw an improvement in role retention and staff satisfaction. Tenants became involved with decision making relating to inspections, surveys, and maintenance works within their blocks. Decisions such as the time and days of works and inspections, and where applicable, design and colour choice. This saw an increase in access to apartments during the next front entrance door inspection. This increased from 18% to 90%. As the building was an in-scope building, the improved engagement and the input from residents helped develop the residents' engagement strategy. All previous safety concerns and complaints were actively used to demonstrate engagement, and with the actions taken to address these issues, helping to increase tenant confidence that their voices would be heard. A second satisfaction review was undertaken after 6 months. The score had increased from 2 out of 10 to 8.5 out of 10. And the regulator asked if they could use the methods used at this block as examples of best practice.
Okay, thank you very much, Jodie. So as we said at the beginning of the presentation, we're no longer dealing with theory. This is real. And as we always like to say, it's now time to act. First things first, then, we want to give you some takeaways from what we've just heard. So the first thing we would suggest is that you need to embrace engagement. There is a huge amount to gain from the process. It's a statutory requirement anyway, so if it's a statutory requirement, get out of it what you can. So that's one thing that we would certainly straight away say: embrace the process and really move with it. The next thing we would suggest is that you should remember that every building is different, and so is every resident. Please do not get caught up into accepting the traditional stereotypes. For example, as Jodie said to me a couple of days ago, not all young people use social media, and not all old people shy away from it. In fact, in her experience, she said that in many instances she's found that the older their residents were, the more queued up in respect of social media were they. So the next thing we would suggest is be practical where you can. Relate your strategy to the practical issues that surround the building. It's got to be about involvement here. So resident engagement has got to be about involving the residents in the right areas. Building safety decisions are all about fire and structural issues. Therefore, Please remember that not every decision that needs to be consulted on about your particular block. It's about building trust with your residents, and that is going to take time and effort. But in our experience, where it's done properly, where it's done in a very methodical way, and with the acceptance, the fact that you have to embrace the process, the results from our clients have been worth it. Please don't forget your own staff and your contractors. Engagement is a two-way process between both your residents, your staff, and contractors, and all parties have got to feel very comfortable and confident in their role. They've got to be able to accept criticism and be able to manage issues effectively and quickly. Now, look, we do totally understand that it is extremely challenging, if not almost nigh impossible, to know exactly who lives in your building. But you've got to at least try. You've got to get the involvement of everybody in that building where you can. You've got to review your strategy, and we would suggest that, as it's a statutory requirement, that you at least plan that review every 2 years, but accept the fact that you may have to review it on other occasions if, for example, you've had a mandatory occurrence or if you're intending to make a change to the building. And finally, if you've written down what you intend to do, do it. You have to act in accordance with your strategy. That is what the regulator is expecting you to do. That is exactly what the regulator is expecting you to be able to demonstrate. And they will be checking to make sure that you are. So they're the 9 takeaways that we would suggest you need to think about as you go through the process of developing your residents' engagement strategy. Now, we wanted to leave you with a few links to some new guidance that was issued at the end of last month. Now, this has been focused on management of safety and also resident engagement. And finally, we just wanted to point out a few elements. Your resident engagement strategy is going to have to be submitted when you are asked to apply for your building assessment certificate. Now, the regulator has 2 teams. One of those teams is going to be considering your safety case report. And the other team is going to be looking at your resident engagement. So your resident engagement strategy is going to come under a certain degree of scrutiny. So we would suggest you need to take this extremely seriously. Understand that each strategy needs to relate to the specifics around your building and your residents. We've often heard clients try to suggest that, oh, we'll just have a generic statement of intent. Really, please do not go down that route. It will not cut it with the regulator. And finally, I just want to remind you that if the regulator is going to be questioning you because they are not comfortable with your strategy, they're also going to be charging you £144 per hour. It's going to cost you money in the long run. So thank you very much for listening, and happy to take questions whenever you have them. Brendan, back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That was, I'm going to be honest with you, a slightly scary proposition, mainly because it's so it's just not part of the culture of residential living. And I suppose to some extent we're building culture here, moving away from that arm's length relationship with between resident and landlord, or and the responsibilities often being handled by a third party who may have erratic service levels. But it's a huge shift, really. This is huge in terms of what the expectation and how we do it. There's a few questions have come in, which I'm going to come to in a moment. I suppose to some extent, I just want to clarify this. Obviously, we have a largely built-to-rent audience, but I do not have any sense that there is any exception, whether you're a renter or a permanent occupant of the building, this dynamic is the same for all occupants, regardless of the type of tenure that they have. So even what about short lets? I mean, there are companies specializing in short lets. I mean, is it the same dynamic there, or do they just fall into if they fall into the programmed consultation, they would just be picked up on that? Or if you have a 3-month let or something like that, would that have to be picked up as well?
So the short lets are just as important as any other tenure. And I think what we found is that by educating the managing agent that was overseeing those short lets and providing them with information and resources that they could then submit to the people on the short lets, it encouraged greater engagement. So they have just the same level of responsibility as does the people residing in the property at that time. They have the same roles and responsibilities as anybody else in the building, and they need to be made aware of those.
Okay, and noted and understood. I'm also struck with the difficulty in getting people to participate meaningfully.
Yes.
I mean, we know it's a statutory obligation, but there are statutory obligations on the residents as well that may or may not be aware of. Practically speaking, I mean, you can host the meetings, you can put the campaigns out and all of that sort of thing, and that's all important and good stuff. But there again, I come back to the cultural question. There isn't sort of a culture of an established, confidence around these sorts of report backs and dealing with them. How do you stimulate this? I mean, I know you touched on it, but could you, from your experience, what have been the most successful ways of getting the occupants, the residents, to engage fully?
For me, it's having that inquisitive nature to find out what's stopping them. Is it a lack of interest? Is it they don't understand what it is we're trying to engage and speak to them about? They don't have the resources. And I think once you start asking those questions, you start having a better understanding of why you're not necessarily getting uptake on your engagement. And then you resolve those issues. You find out what your barriers are and you overcome those barriers. Now, it's by no means an overnight success story. The block that I spoke to you about in the case study probably was one of the quicker uptake blocks, and that still took 6 months of regular, consistent engagement.
Okay, can I just press you on this point? So if the uptake is poor for all sorts of reasons, and we have a question from Diego Landetta, who's making the point of what happens if English is not your first language, but whether it be a language barrier or just a can't be bothered barrier, if you can demonstrate to the regulator that you are consistently and regularly attempting to meet, even if the response is poor or lower than you would like, that will get you through the compliance threshold. Is that the case?
Absolutely. It shouldn't be your goal. Obviously, your goal should be to have as many engaged residents as possible. But the regulator does understand that this is, as you said earlier, very new. And it can be quite intimidating for all parties involved. So as long as you can demonstrate that you have made available every opportunity as is reasonably practicable, and that the residents have various methods of opportunity to reach out and engage, then that will suffice.
Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of questions coming up on this point: the silent, the vocal minority and the silent majority, and that dynamic of who do you listen to? The squeaky gate syndrome and all the rest of it. So, but just to recap on everything that you're saying, and this is applicable. I mean, to long lets, short lets, and in between lets, that everybody is responsible here. So the responsibility is on both sides, both the resident and the management. The trick, it seems to me, is to make sure you have a programmed regular set of engagements, whether it's online or in person or whatever it is, and demonstrate that you do that consistently. and your point earlier about embracing the problems or embracing challenges, but let's say it's a language problem, again, once you know there's a problem, you can start to address it. And just the documenting all of that will keep you on the right side of the regulator. It does seem, I think looking at the questions, I think there's a fearfulness of, oh my goodness, if it's not successful from the beginning, I'm going to be unsuccessful. And you just reassure the audience on that point, if you would.
That's absolutely not the case. And the liaison that I've had with the regulator, and part of the role of me discussing with them best practice was also really emphasizing on the fact that this is not overnight. You're not going to walk into a block and have excellent engagement and successful engagement straight away. This is going to be for the long haul. This is a hard slog, and they do understand that, and they do appreciate that. They do understand that the majority of your residents are probably going to fall in the categories that we spoke about earlier with the levels of engagement, probably the 1 or 2 categories. A handful, a small minority are going to sit in the actively engaged and actively participating category. And you do have to be mindful that those people don't necessarily speak for everybody in your block. So whilst you can listen to the lived experience and the issues that they're raising, be mindful that you also have a large majority of people sitting in the background that you're not necessarily hearing from. And the regulator does appreciate that.
All right, so a couple of questions coming in now on the ratio or the amount of engagement. So if you had I think one of your examples was, I can't remember, sort of just under 100 homes. And then there's a question here on starting a portfolio of 2,500, which would include everybody from students, professionals, social residents, asylum seekers, as well as build to rent, I guess. How do you say I should be doing this every 6 months or every 3? How do you determine the level of engagement according to the scale of development? I mean, your thoughts on that?
I think the level of engagement needs to be determined on a block by block basis. And I do feel that this might be where some people will fall down. This isn't a generic engagement strategy across your business. This is on a block by block basis, and you will have some blocks that actively want to be engaged, and the engagement is on a much more regular basis. And you'll have some blocks that you find don't require as much information or not interested in as much information, and the engagement happens while still consistent, not as regularly.
Okay, so it's a block by block thing, and I just want to kind of expand this a little bit, because the regulation requires what it requires. So how do we do this? Well, we do this variously, but it means that the site team, and there's unfortunately an anonymous question coming on, just a point of, in their experience, it seems to be that once you start engaging, the response is often more positive, even if it's slow, but more positive than perhaps one would expect. But that then points a question to the site team and the quality of that site team and the ability of that site team to really kind of oxygenate this process. I certainly know from build to rent operators, the operating costs are high, the margins are low, and staff are stretched. So this does seem to put another burden on the industry. I won't say it's going to be the most expensive thing to do, but it's obviously going to come at a cost. I mean, is the regulator aware of this? I know the importance of this, so I'm not trying to in any way minimize the importance of doing this. But has thought been given to how the cost of this could be managed?
I've not had discussions personally with the regulator with regards to what this is going to cost individual businesses. In terms of engagement, there certainly are some quick wins that are not expensive. And also, you've raised a really valid point. The site team and the staff that you have on site must have the confidence and the resource to be able to undertake this engagement, and not be overwhelmed if there all of a sudden is a large uptake and increase in engagement coming in.
Sorry, Brendan, just wanted to add to that. When we've been discussing, in some instances, cost with the regulator, and the regulators turned around and said that most important thing for them is the outcome. And yes, they do accept that things are going to cost, but it's got to be proportional. And I think that's the other element as well. It's got to be specific to the building, specific to the residents, but proportional as well.
I mean,
sorry.
No, carry on.
So as Jody was saying there about, doing everything that you can reasonably do, that's the most important thing that they're actually looking for here. What is reasonable for that particular building? What is reasonable for those particular residents? So I think that's the most important part. Costs are always going to be a problem. Costs are going to be considered, but at the end of the day, it is a statutory duty. And so they are expecting that something is done. It all depends upon the level. And I think you hit on a really important point right at the very beginning of your questions. This is a huge culture change. The whole concept of building safety has got to be outcome based, and we have got to think about cultural change. That's exactly what Dame Judith said in her report. We are indifferent, or we were indifferent, we were ignorant. We cannot be or continue to be that. And so you're right, culture has got to change. It's got to be driven as well from within the industry.
It's indeed, and it's unfortunately it's a cultural change is a bit of a slow process. I want to come back just to your point on proportionality. I think that's an important word to reasonableness and proportionality are important words to insert into conversations around the building. So about the consultation aspects of the building safety, some of the technical stuff have different criteria. That proportionality, I guess, will be tested variously, and perhaps we'll get to some sort of understanding of that, what that might be. I guess the regulator, we have to suck it and see. There's no sense of this until we really get into it and we get some evaluations of it by the regulator, some deemed to be good and some deemed to be bad. But is there anything you would add to proportionality that would help build, this is going to come down to building managers and the teams that back that. I mean, I see a level of risk for our industry that we do not have the people and we don't have the career paths mapped out, or the recruitment drives to attract people into our industry, and I'm just talking about build to rent rather than the whole of residential real estate, to do this. So that poor proportionality, we're going to have to build a workforce here, and that's going to take time. Any thoughts on that?
Jody, your thoughts?
I think, yes, it will take time, and I think it's understood that it will take time. I think it's understood that this aspect of the safety case report, this element to it, is a huge change. So slow and steady wins the race. I think once you do what we did discover and what we have realized, especially over the last 2 years where I've been actively involved in building safety engagement, is that the more comfortable your staff are and the better equipped they are to deal with these issues and these concerns, the better staff retention you have.
A long way to go on this one, I have to say. Yeah. I want to shift this. Sorry, David.
No. All I was going to turn around and say is, and it's a saying that I always think of, because when I was dealing with law, I remember my lecturer always saying, think about what the man on the Clapham omnibus would do. Yep. And then you're starting to think about this on a proportional basis, yep, and a reasonable basis. So sending out a survey, sending out a letter, that's a reasonable thing to do. Asking people what it is or how they would like to be engaged, that's a reasonable thing to do. Not doing it, I would then find that very difficult to justify to the regulator.
No, indeed, that man on the Clapham omnibus has had a huge to-do list over the years, hasn't he? I'd like to just spread this, because a few minutes left, to a wider thing. If we look at single-family housing, which is certainly in build-to-rent land, it's going to become a huge part of our sector, and will be held by a number of institutional investors and other larger operators. Houses have a different safety regime. Is there any differences about how this should be approached? Are there exclusions? What would you say to the single family housing world?
I think, you know, having worked for a charitable housing association, the majority of our households fitted this criteria. And it's how you approach and discuss the educational pieces with these households, that safety, their safety is your priority. And it's how you get that across to them. And by providing them with educational pieces so that they too can be responsible for their own safety and that of their neighbours within the block, helps develop this engagement, this community.
Okay, so I suppose my question was really more around so if you look at institutional landlords, they will own big, well, there may not be a big block in the sense of a block of flats, but big blocks of single houses and in a more of a housing estate perspective, and it puts them into a category which is you know, being responsible for multiple homes in houses. Does that have a bearing? Are there any what are the circumstances? Is there any additionality or not for the way that should be handled? No, so a different type of building structure, but still great risk to a managed portfolio, I suppose is where I'm going on this.
I don't think they should be handled or managed any differently to anybody else.
So it's a single, no different. I suppose the genesis of my question is that the safety dimensions are different, but no, the universal application of this now is very, very, very clear.
I think if we're going to change culture, Brendan, that's what's needed. Whilst there is a statutory duty to deal with this in respect of high risk blocks or higher risk blocks as they are now called, I think if we're going to change culture, that needs to be an industry-wide approach. So I think it would be folly to think that we could just apply this to the higher risk buildings. Those higher risk buildings are potentially going to change over time, and they may come down to a lower level. So just believing that this is going to be above 18 meters or 7 stories for the next 20, 30 years, I think would be folly. So I think if we're going to change the culture, we've got to change the way that we're thinking and think about resident engagement across the board. My view.
No, I think that's very accurate. And it seems to me one of the things that we don't market about our homes, and particularly in blocks, is that they are safe and secure. I mean, we talk about lifestyle options, you know, and lots of amenity and all that kind of stuff, and that's lovely. But actually marketing a property as being safe and secure because it's been built well, got it right first time, and managed well has got to now be a significant consumer opportunity, given the regulations and the statutory requirements that are out there. So the culture is coming, I guess. At least it never sits still. I think we have no more time. There's lots of comments coming on lack of awareness. So your points on education, I think, are very, very well made. I think to the audience, if there's nothing more from the panel, this video will be available on the UKAA website, and it's part of our purpose is to educate and to share the information from experts, so we can all get on with meeting these obligations and doing them well. And then increasingly, I see in our industry and from investors, there's a real shift in their thinking to get it right first time. They're tired of the kind of having to play catch up or go back, and that's a real shift in the mood from the investors, the world, that you know, getting it right first time and paying for it to be got right first time is increasingly now on their minds. So I'd like to thank you, David and Jody, for your contribution today. And another huge area demystified for the industry and for our audience. And we look forward to the final segment of this, which will be at conference on the 2nd of November. So please sign up and get your tickets for that. It's going to be a good show. The details are all on the UKAA website. And without any further ado, I bid you all farewell and wish you all a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.